supplementary lecture on Augustine, also called St. Augustine, Augustine, or Augustine of Hippo. Today, or for this lecture, you read Augustine's Confessions, a book written in Latin. And it's a very important link in the story we're telling about Western literature and culture. So here's a picture of Augustine, and this is what Augustine's saying here. Tolle outline notes et lege eis post lectionem. That means take outline notes and study them or read them after the lecture. That's my small admonition to you. Clearly maybe not clearly, I'm making a joke based on today's reading. Probably the most famous scene in the book that you read for today is Book 8, when Augustine has his conversion experience, and he hears someone say, tolle et lege, which means take and read. We're going to come back to that experience. First, I want you to write in your notebook an answer to one question. I want you to take at least 2 minutes to write in your notebook the answer to this question. Have you ever tried to change a behavior but could not? So pause the video now and write an answer. I'm assuming that you have written an answer after pausing the video, and now I want you to discuss this experience of having two selves, one that wants to change a behavior and one that does not. I want you to discuss that with someone from your class. Maybe call them. That would be great. At the least have a few texts to exchange the information to get a little perspective. And again, we always do this because we bring prejudice to everything we do and everything we read. And if we're at least aware of what our experience is, then we have a better chance of coming to a text with an open mind. All right. So the leading question is this: who are you? The part that wants to change or the part that resists? You can also write about that in your notebook, pausing the video now. So all of this is coming to the experience that Augustine had in Book 8 of the Confessions, where he has his conversion experience. Now, Augustine was already a Christian, so why is it called a conversion experience? Well, it's because when he felt like he really finally turned to God fully. Conversion comes from ultimately from the Latin root for turning. So he's turning to God. That's how Augustine would conceive of this. He's turning to God once and for all. So if we look at page 1192 of our textbook, 1192, we can see that Augustine is in a very bad way emotionally. Thus I was sick at heart and in torment, accusing myself with new intensity of bitterness, twisting and turning in my chain in the hope that it might be utterly broken. For what held me was so small a thing, but it still held me. So he's talking basically about lust or relationships or romance. He loved loving. And Augustine is trying to become celibate as a priest. So the metaphor here is a chain, being enslaved. Now, that's a living metaphor in the time of Augustine, because he would have been to the market and would have seen slaves. So human beings were actually chained and carried around in chains like animals. So that's that. Now, in this experience, Augustine is trying to give up a habit. So he's having, he's trying to change. So if we look on page, let's see, page 1193, 1193, I think it is, somewhere. Where does he say that? Oh, yes. If you look on page 1193, Augustine says in the third paragraph towards the bottom, 1193, how long shall I go on saying tomorrow and again tomorrow? Why not now? Why not have an end to my uncleanness this very hour? There's another metaphor. Morality is often associated with cleanness. So he's trying to give up his habit of his pleasure in the flesh. Many religions issue the pleasures of the world as false, because the theory is that if you that you can't have the pleasures of the other world if you have the pleasures of this world. It's sort of one or the other. I'm not saying that's true, I'm just saying that's what the message is. In any case, if you reread this, and I would like you to reread this several times, He hears a boy or a girl's voice. Take and read, take and read. So is this an auditory hallucination? I don't know. Or is it a message that he heard in his head that was so convincing that it almost seemed that it was on the outside? I don't know. And then takes up the Bible and does what's called a lucky dip. A lucky dip is when Christians pick up the Bible, and they use it kind of like an oracle, kind of like Bwabwe, or kind of like, Bwabwe, or maybe, I can't think what I was going to say. Oh, the I Ching, the Chinese book of oracles. And they just take the message, they open the book randomly and find a message, find the first sentence their eyes light upon, and then take that to be a personal message. So what he got was Romans 13:13. So this is a letter written by Paul to Christians in Rome. And it says, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and impurities, not in contention and envy, put ye on the Lord Christ and make provision for the flesh in its concupiscences. So, so he's worried about overcoming his attachment to, I guess, romance is probably what we would say. And this is the moment he actually does it. So in Augustine, we see a kind of attention to details of his inner self, which is foundational in Western thought. There's a direct lineage from Augustine to the present. And doing so, let me trace a few highlights for you. So Augustine read Plato, okay, and Petrarch read Augustine. So Petrarch was the great humanist poet that spread vernacular Renaissance humanism across Europe through his poetry. And he was a mad reader of Augustine. And everyone picks up on Petrarch. So this attention, attention to the minutiae of our inner world is very important. And it starts here in Augustine. Okay, skip these slides. Now I want to move on to a general discussion of Christianity. So just to sum up about the conversion experience, I would like you to reread it and sort of be responsible for it. So today's background is Christianity, right? Christianity is a religion that traces its origin. Here's a definition of Christianity. Christianity is a religion that traces its origins to Jesus of Nazareth, whom it affirms to be the chosen one, the Christ of God. Christ actually means the anointed one. Christos means the oil, putting oil on someone's head. Christianity is the religion of 1/3 of the people of the world. More than, I guess that's 2.1 billion people are identified in some way with Christian, or another way with Christian movement, with substantial populations on every continent. Despite its representation and support in many lands today, Christianity has been principally a Western phenomenon. Yet the influence of Christianity extends beyond the borders of traditional Christendom. It has affected other religions and been affected by them in return, and its ethos continues to shape the cultures of nations no longer overtly Christian, which is what I often tell you in class. The Western mind is deeply Christianized, and a Westerner might be an atheist, or an anti-Christian even, but that still means they're have deep influences from Christianity. And that's just a simple Britannica Encyclopedia of World Religions definition. That's not the complete definition of Christianity, but that gives you a sense of what a common definition would be. The point is this for us, that understanding Christianity is indispensable to understanding the West, including Western literature. So today I'm going to give you some background on Christianity. One, to help with Augustine, and two, to fill in the blanks about what was happening in the Middle Ages in Western Europe. This 1,000 years of history from 500 to 1500. Okay, so here's an example of how Christianity influences literature. It is often said that in a Christian era there can be no tragedy. Now we know that the Greeks loved tragedy. Not the Greeks, the ancient Athenians. So how can there be no tragedy? Well, because at the end of the world, according to Christian belief, God comes back and judges everyone and takes care of everyone. So in the end, every bad is made right. Every wrong is made right. Every bad is made good. So that would affect how literature exists. So even Shakespeare's tragedies are often called tragicomedies. Okay, so I gave you an encyclopedia definition of Christianity. Let me boil it down into its main ingredients, the sine qua non. Sine qua non means that the things that you have to be Christian. So for one, Christianity is monotheistic. If you're not a monotheist, you're not a Christian. Monotheism means you have one God. Christians have to believe in the Trinity or the triune nature of God. That doesn't mean three gods. It means that God has three aspects or three persons, but it's just a single God. Yes, I know it doesn't make sense. It seems like a contradiction. And Christians believe in salvation. They believe that the death and resurrection, as we saw in Mark, or Jesus, means that every human being is saved if they accept their salvation, and depending on which branch of Christianity, depending on what you do. Okay, so let's talk more about monotheism. So monotheism can be opposed to, that means one God, mono, one, theism, God. Monotheism can be opposed to atheism, which means not believing in a God. And notice these are structurally related. They might seem opposite, but they both exist on a spectrum. There's theism in both. So it's like this. It reminds me of a time I was in a restaurant in Slovenia and I ordered the vegetarian. I was a vegetarian at the time. I ordered the vegetarian platter, and they brought me a plate with salad, pickled vegetables, which were common in Slovenia at the time, and a big slab of meat. And I said I ordered the vegetarian platter, and I said, "Oh, sorry about that." So they took the plate back, and it was back within 30 seconds, and it was the very same plate without the meat, but the meat juice and the space occupied by the meat was still there. So it's not really vegetarian, it's just the absence of meat. And so really, atheism is sort of like the same structure of theism, but without the God. So even though an atheist probably wouldn't say it this way, structurally speaking, monotheism and atheism are deeply bound to each other. Polytheism is different. Sometimes I believe Taiwanese Taoism is accused of being polytheistic by local Christians. This means many gods, or several gods. Henotheism means many gods but one main God. And monism. Note, this is structurally different. It's neither theism nor atheism. Monism does not posit an entity, a cosmic entity. It posits a singularity including everything, which would mean you and me, and if there's a God, it's part of it, and we're all connected somehow. So this would be more like Advaita Hinduism. Advaita Hinduism is maybe 20th century Hinduism that's more philosophically inclined, less prone to ritual, something like that. Okay, another way to answer the question of what is Christianity is to give you the Lord's Prayer, also called the Pater Noster, which means the Our Father. That's the Latin word for Our Father. This is a very influential text, and I am going to give you extra credit points if you can write the entire Lord's Prayer in the back of your, well, actually we might have an online exam, so I will give you a space for extra credit if you can memorize the Lord's Prayer. Not because I'm trying to make you a Christian, but just because knowing literature, I think I don't have to tell you guys how memorizing texts gives us insight into a culture and a language. That's why you were made to memorize so many tangshe when you were children. Okay, so the Lord's Prayer is foundational Christian beliefs. I think my slides might be mixed up. Right. No, sorry, I'm kind of mixing things up here. So here are some foundational Christian beliefs. Like I guess I'm still on the basics of Christianity. I think this slide means anyway, long story. So let me just backtrack a little bit. So again, another way of saying the basic ingredients of Christianity is the Trinity, which I talked about, Jesus as a Savior, which I talked about, the divinity of Jesus. You have to believe, if you're a Christian, you have to believe Jesus is God. You can't just say he's a good man. And you have to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, because if he doesn't overcome death, then he can't save you, right? Oh, Christians also believe in final judgment. Final judgment means Jesus comes back for a second world tour, and he separates, at that point, God separates out the goats from the sheep. And you want to be a sheep. The goats go to hell, the sheep go to heaven, right? Which means Christians also believe in eternal reward and punishment. Now again, eternal does not mean a long time, it means no time. Christians believe in baptism. We read in Mark how John was doing this ritual in the river where he would dunk people in the river, and as a symbol of washing off their old life, as a symbol of rebirth. that is a vital part of Christianity. You are not a Christian if you have not been baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Literally, if those words are not spoken, you're not engaged in some kind of baptism ritual, which is some kind of rubbing of water, at least rubbing of oil and water on your head, and sometimes a complete immersion in water in a pool, then you're not Christian. So here are some foundational Christian practices. So another way of talking about what a Christian is practices. Church is one. Now, church does not mean the building. Church, ecclesia, means the community. So here you have a picture of Christians engaging in church without the church building. This is clearly someone's living room. And I picked this photo because it looks exactly like a church I used to go to when I was raised Catholic, and there was a point when the parish we belonged to the church had not been built yet, so we met in the priest's house, just like this. So it's the people, again, that comprise the church, not the building. Another foundational Christian practice is forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is a key concept here because it leads to confession, and confession leads to introspection. Introspection means looking inside yourself, and as I said earlier, there is an unbroken lineage from Augustine to Petrarch, and I'm missing somebody on the other end. Who comes after Petrarch? Why am I not remembering this? Anyway, basically everyone. So in our period, we see the nascence, the birth of this tendency to micromanage and to obsess about the things that are going on inside of you, right? It's not about action, it's about thought. This comes from the Christian practice of forgiveness. You look inside and see what you've done wrong, right? So here is a priest in a confessional and a person confessing their sins. Now the wooden box, the wooden structure is called a confessional, and so I guess it's hard to explain. This is an open door confessional. Sometimes the box is completely enclosed, and when I was Catholic, you could choose to go face to face, or to go like this, where it's semi-private, or to go completely private, where you're completely anonymous. But this way, you continually confess the things you've done wrong, which psychologically speaking is extremely healthy. And the priest here is not forgiving the man. He's an instrument forgiving the man in the name of God. If you see, the priest has a white scarf on top of his white garment. The white scarf means he is sort of empowered to be the agent of God. He himself doesn't have the power to forgive sins, only God does. That's how a Christian would say it. Healing is another foundational Christian practice. As you saw in Mark, Jesus healed the sick. He always had compassion on people. This is a televangelist, someone who does this for television. Oftentimes for television they do instant healings. This is clearly very controversial because there have been scandals and scandals and scandals. There's been fraud because, I'm kind of afraid to touch the subject too much, but I suppose I could try to explain a complex phenomenon. There are psychosomatic illnesses and there are psychosomatic cures. The placebo effect is very real, as is the nocebo effect. So just going to someone with the faith that they can help you might help you feel better. And so sometimes what has happened is people go to these televangelists, these faith healers, these ministers, and they feel better for a little while. And maybe they give a lot of money, and it's a long story, but Jesus was a healer, and there are all sorts of healing that have been practiced in the name of Jesus since then, because Jesus told his students, it's called the Great Commission, go out, spread the word, and heal. He said to do it. So that's why Christians still do it today. The one I just showed you was a Protestant version. This is a Catholic version of healing. This is a very famous place in France called Lourdes. The grade school I went to for 9 years was called Our Lady of Lourdes, named after this. There's a cave, a grotto in the background. The story goes that the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mom, and also the Queen of the Heavens, La Reina de los Cielos, appeared here, I think it was late 19th century, and so many people have gone to this site and experienced miraculous healings. And so here you see a lot of sick and old people going to Catholic Mass there. And again, if you look at the priest, you can see he's wearing that white scarf, which means he has the power to work for God. And he's giving sacred bread to them. communion. I'll explain that if I have time later. And here's another picture of the same place. The water is considered holy, and you can actually, I bet there's some place in Taipei you could probably buy holy water from Lourdes, France. It itself is considered to have healing properties. And I've seen this at Taiwanese temples too. Sorry, a Taiwanese Buddhist, what do you call it, temple, I guess. They had a service one day, and they had, I don't know, 150 bottles of water in big boxes, and they gave out the bottles of water afterwards. So if you drink it, you get a special kind of blessing. Communion, yeah, here we go. Communion is a foundational Christian practice, and this has slightly different meanings in different Christian churches, different denominations of Christianity. But basically, Jesus had a supper, a last meal with his students, and he said that the bread had become his body, and it has to do with lots of beliefs about sacrifice, which I'm not going to go into here, but just so you know that this is a foundational Christian practice. What it consists of is going and getting a bread in a ritualized service called, in the Catholic Church, Mass, and in Protestant churches it's just called maybe a communion service or a church service. Another foundational Christian practice is proselytizing or missionary work. Because Jesus sent his disciples to spread the word, many Christians take it upon themselves to make others join their church. And again, this has a wide array of interpretations. Some people don't try actively to make other people join their church, and some Christians do. So here you have a picture of two Mormons, or Christians belonging to the Church of Latter-day Saints. This is an American branch of Protestantism, widely condemned by mainstream Christian churches like the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church. And the Mormons, as they're called, send two young men. Well, they send young men all over the world. They train them very well in languages, and you can see them here. And you can see them in Taipei riding bicycles. And their job is to spend 2 years trying to make other people Mormons. And they're very well trained, so almost anything you ask them, they'll have an answer for. And they're called elders, interestingly enough. And if you go to the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City, it's often young women. I don't know why it's men on the outside and women on the inside, but anyway. So here you have a picture of Christian missionaries working in Africa, or I think this is, to try to Christianize Africans. And the same thing has happened here in Taipei as well, and Taiwan as well, as you probably are aware of. So one note about Christianity in Taiwan: only a small portion of a range of Christian churches is represented here in Taiwan. So if you look at this chart, this is a timeline. So early Christianity didn't have a name per se for the different variations of Christianity, but there are councils, and every council and every split on this line shows that there's, what do I call it, a crystallization of thought, which eventually ends up starting a new Christian church. Now, they're all equally Christian. They might condemn each other and say everyone else isn't Christian, but they are. But in any case, if you look at the chart, there's really only two kinds of Christianity here in Taiwan. And they're both Western. They're both from the Western branch. You have Catholicism, Tianzhujiao, and you have Protestantism, Xinjiao. Right? Look at all the ones we don't have. So it's sort of like Buddhism in the West. People have no idea what Buddhism is in the West, but Christianity is much more varied and much less in agreement than you might think. There's much more variety of beliefs and practices than you might think if you only know Christianity here in Taiwan. That's the point. So there's a common misunderstanding about terms. Taiwanese Christianity is mostly Xinjiao, although it calls itself Jidujiao, and that makes itself seem opposed to Tianzhujiao, which is also Jidujiao. So they're all Jidujiao, right? So Tianzhujiao is also Jidujiao. The people who call themselves Jidujiao are really Xinjiao, or Protestants. All right. So this is where I was going before. The Lord's Prayer. This is the most successful poem in the West. This is the most successful oral text in the West, and it's biblical. It's based on the Bible, which means a lot if you're a Westerner. This is Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13, and this particular translation is the New International Version, which is a version that scholars and students use when they're not motivated by a particular brand of Christianity. So here's the text. Our Father in heaven, hallowed or blessed be your name, or holy be your name. Your kingdom come. In other words, this is a command, may your kingdom come now. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And as I said, if you memorize this, you'll have a spot for extra credit on the midterm or maybe the final. I haven't decided which. Now, as I said, this is a foundational Christian prayer then and now. This prayer was used by early Christians, so it's ancient. It's a very old text. In the biblical accounts, Matthew and Luke, we didn't read about it in Mark because it's not in Mark. Jesus' disciples asked Jesus how to pray, and this is the model he gives them. So supposedly this is straight from the teacher. Now, whether this was meant to be used word for word formulaically or as an example, for example, you could make any prayer that expresses reliance on God, is debatable. So we don't know if Jesus meant, if this is real, if the story were real, we wouldn't know if Jesus meant use these exact words or do it in this way, right? As I said, this is one of the most successful oral texts of the West. Every Christian and most Westerners will know this text by heart. So it's an oral text still in today's hyper-literate world. So as I said, this prayer has a direct link to Jesus, supposedly. And I think I said that. Right, so to be clear, today Christians take this as a formula. So they believe that Jesus literally said these words, so that's why it's so sacred, right? Because, wow, we have the exact words of the Master. The doxology was added later following Jewish tradition. The doxology is a bit that people add at the end that says, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever, amen. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever, amen. That was not part of the biblical. The prayer is eschatological. It has to do with things of the afterlife. It seems to have served early Christians as a means to reflect on post-existence or life after death. It's also biblical. For almost all Christians, the Bible itself has authority. So we do it like literature, but for some people, this is literally the word of an almighty being, the most important book ever written for most Christians. I wanted to show you that this prayer consists of 6 petitions, 6 requests. So this says, may God's kingdom happen here and now. May God's will be done. So God is figured as a person with a particular will, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. And we ask that we be given our daily bread. Now clearly bread is a metaphor here, a symbol, a symbol for the things we need on a given day, not just food, but shelter, paper, whatever we need on a given day. The 4th petition is to be forgiven our debts, and this could be financial, and it also could be moral, like if I've done something wrong. It could also be emotional and every other way. Any kind of debt is when we feel like we owe someone something, and we are forgiven our debt as we are also forgiven our debtors. So there's a nice reciprocity here. And the final one is lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So keep us from falling off the path. Remember the metaphor about how hard it is to get seeds to grow and give fruit, because there's some people aren't even on the path. Some people are choked off by thorns. Sometimes the bird eats it. So here the yellow request is, don't let that happen to us, and deliver us from the evil one reflects a belief in some kind of evil force in the world, the devil or the accuser or something like that. Okay, so today's readings show us a time when Christianity was still in the formative period. Christianity was originally a Jewish sect. It was called the Way, Tao. The sect met opposition within Jewish communities, and through Paul of Tarsus, the author of the New Testament letters, such as Romans that we saw, was retooled for non-Jews. So Paul was not a direct student of Jesus, but he's very important because he was the one who helped spread this Jewish sect to the rest of the world. Thus, Christianity eventually blended with Greek and Roman philosophy and religion as it made its way into non-Jewish practice. In other words, Christianity is syncretistic. It doesn't have a single ingredient. It is not the direct words and teachings of this Jewish teacher, Yeshua ben Yusuf. Jesus of Nazareth. Early Christianity, until it was adopted by the Roman Emperor Constantine as the official state religion in 380 of the Common Era, Christians faced persecution and opposition, kind of like Falun Gong today. Here's a famous example. Nero, the Roman emperor, tried to inculpate Christians for the fire of Rome in 64 of the Common Era. The first centuries saw various lines of development of Christianity, most of which did not survive those early centuries. So I guess speaking as an historian, it's curious to think, for all we know, the kind of Christianity that has survived to us today is not the original kind. We don't know. Christian apologists, an apologist is someone who makes a defense for something. It's not someone who's saying they're sorry. It comes from the Greek word. Christian apologists began codifying their belief in credos, or statements of doctrine read at worship services or at conversions. Credo is Latin for I believe. And so it became so these statements would start with credo, like I believe in this, I believe in that. And these were read when people were baptized, or sometimes when they met for their church service. The first ecumenical or church council or general council was convened by Constantine in 325 at Nicaea. One of the main issues was to clarify the belief that God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, are of the same substance. So the Roman Emperor Constantine helped institutionalize Christianity, helped to make it safe to be a Christian. And since there were so many different varieties, he called for a council. And there was an issue that was in the minds of many people, basically a philosophical or conceptual problem. How can you have one God if you say Jesus was God, and there's also a God Father, so Jesus is the Son, God is the Father, that sounds like two gods. And so with the philosophers, they borrowed from Greek philosophy and they said, well, it's one substance. So for example, you could have one bottle of water and pour it into 2 cups. It's the same water, right? Something like that. So the Council of Nicaea was trying to hammer out some of the basic conceptual problems they had in creating this new religion. So here's the Credo, which was devised at Nicaea and is still used today. So if you want to hear this, you can go to the local Catholic church. There's one up on Xinchanglu. It's called, what's it called? Holy Family, I believe. Anyway, so here's the Credo. Credo in unum Deum, Patrem omnipotentem, factorem caeli et terrae. Oh, I should probably read it in English. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. So it sounds kind of like a legal document, right? It's very careful how it words things. And in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages. So they're working out all the conceptual slippage here. So et ex patrinatum ante omnia secula. So they had to say, well, if Jesus was God, he was born before time, right? Because if you say he's born in the year 0, well, then he's not God. So there's all kinds of contradictions in these concepts. God from God, this is beautiful. God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, one in being with the Father, through whom all things were made. It's almost like a little poem. Deum de Deo, lumen de lumine, Deum verum de Deo vero, genitum non factum, consubstantialem patri, per quem omnia facta sunt. Really beautiful language. And this is the basic index. So if you can say this, then you're a Christian and believe it. Let me clarify the word substance, to stand under. Substance is a Western philosophical term that assumes that reality is what underlies, quote unquote, the phenomenal world. So we have these sense impressions, and underneath it, there's something real. Hence, things that seem truer to us if they are deep. Hence, things that seem truer to us we describe as deep or profound, because this primal metaphor of substare, to stand under. Thus, we see that Christianity as we know it is intimately bound up with classical philosophy. In fact, without classical philosophy, we wouldn't have modern Christianity. Right, so this is Thomist metaphysics, and it talks a little bit about how they saw the world. So at the very core of things is prime matter, right? So the deeper you go in, the more real things are. All right. So Augustine of Hippo. So this book that we read for today, Augustine's Confessions, is foundational to Christian doctrine even today. For example, the Catholic Church uses Augustine's writings to justify and explain its catechism. The catechism is the basic teaching, so when someone becomes a Christian, they study it. And it's a book. It's literally a book. You can find it here in Taipei, I'm sure, probably written in Chinese, for all I know. But the catechism is published by the Vatican. It's the basic book of Christianity, and if you look at it, it'll justify what it says by the Bible and by Augustine's Confessions, among other texts. So Augustine's Confessions are still the backbone of Christian belief even today. The Confessions is also foundational to literary history. As I have mentioned, the interiority of Augustine's text is unmatched up to the point in the West, and will remain so for nearly a millennia. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would model his Confessions on Augustine. Petrarch would model his inner-directed sonnets on Augustine. So the Confessions is often called the first autobiography in the West. So what is autobiography? Well, it's a kind of self-writing that assumes the development to some meaningful end point. A self-writing. Now there's lots of kinds of self-writing, but it assumes basically there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was always all going to one place. Another way to say what an autobiography is to say that the narrator and the protagonist and the subject are the same. So the person telling the story, the main character in the story, and the subject matter of the story are all the same. Not all cultures produce autobiography. For example, cultures which believe in reincarnation tend not to produce autobiography because autobiography assumes the unity of self over time, the permanent significance of individual choices, individualism, etc. These ideas stem from Christian ideas of individual salvation, an eternal entity intervening in time. Now, if you believe that your personality, let's say you're a Zen Buddhist or something like this, Tibetan Buddhist, you might say that your personality is just sort of an after effect and it's not real, that it's your gross mind, not your subtle mind, and that as you die, it will just drift away like dandelion leaves. But that's not a Christian way of viewing things. So the Christians believe that that's permanent, that's the real you. That's your soul, and it's going to go on. So why would you write about it? If you're a Buddhist, why would you write about it? Because it's impermanent anyway. It's not important. Why else did we read Augustine of Hippo? Because he's by far the most important philosopher and theologian of the Middle Ages. So we're reading some of the great highlights of the period, and he is one of them. Not to mention the fact that Augustine is remarkably bright. He showed talent and was educated. He became a rhetorician. He became a Christian at the urging of his mother and was baptized in the year 387 of the Common Era. He became a priest in 391 of the Common Era. He exercised widespread influence when he was the bishop of Hippo. The bishop is like the head priest of a region. Also, Augustine lived through significant changes in the Roman Empire, including the sack of Rome in 410. Because he lived through the sack of Rome, he wrote a book called City of God, and he posited this sort of heaven place, which is the real city of God, not here. Everyone thought because Rome was the Christian capital of the world, and everyone thought that was great, but when it got destroyed by barbarians who came and stole everything and raped everyone and left and burned everything, the whole idea that there was the city of God made no more sense, because why wouldn't God protect his own city? Oh, because we must have misunderstood. The real city of God is in heaven. All right, next point. Augustine is known for his theory of original sin. This is how he explains suffering in the human experience. Every religion has to tackle this problem. If every religion in some way or another posits some good that is not present, right? Christians call it God. Buddhists call it nirvana, getting out of this dream of rebirth and having human experience. Augustine explains the problem of suffering by saying we deserve it because we're born with original sin. We did something wrong, and we've got to go back to God. Augustine was very prolific. He wrote over 100 books and treatises and some 500 sermons. Another great medieval thinker from Spain, Isidore of Seville, said anyone who claims that they've read all of Augustine is not honest. Augustine wrote the Confessions around 400 of the Common Era for the purpose of showing his personal transformation from doubt and misery, this is called the confession of sin, to happiness and purpose, the confession of the glory of God. Or as he puts it in the first words of his book, Magnus est Domine et laudabilis valde. Great are you, Lord, and greatly to be praised. Right? So this book is kind of a prayer. It's a confession of the glory of God. But first you've got to get the trash out. You confess your sins first, and then later you confess your Christianity. If you remember the book called Praise of Praises, Tehillim, which we also call the Psalms, that praise is a Judeo-Christian practice. Praise. So praise and worship are key words in the Jewish and Christian tradition. We suspect that the Confessions was probably meant to be part of a larger work. It has 13 chapters. And this brings us to chapter 10, which I made optional for you. I made this chapter optional for you. Chapter 10 is on memory. Sorry, I have a bug in my office. Chapter 10 is on memory, and memory is one of the faculties of the soul. Memory, imagination, and will. Memory, imagination, and will. If you ask Augustine what the soul is, he would say memory, imagination, and will. And for him, these seem to be non-physical, and they seem to endure after death. So he writes on all three of those. Now, we started talking about will when he had his conversion experience. We have this power inside of ourselves, this power of choice. For him, that's divine, that's eternal. We'll always have the power of choice. And memory is also divine. Now, he didn't make this up. He's getting this from Plato. Augustine was a Neo-Platonist. As I said, he was very well studied, and he was one of the people that connected classical philosophy to Christianity. The Platonists had a thing called anamnesis, which means that, how do I explain this? Okay, Plato wrote about the soul in different works. In the Meno, the Phaedo, and the Phaedra, particularly, he talks about the soul and about memory, and they're connected. So Plato's idea was this. We have something inside, let me say it this way. Plato's idea was basically epistemological. Anything we see or experience on the outside is something we already have in us. If it's not in us, we can't recognize it. So for Plato and for Augustine, we all have this sense of a good life, what makes us happy. Now, where did this come from if we've never been happy? It's implanted in us. It's a memory. For Plato, it's a memory from past lives, and he believes in reincarnation, but Augustine doesn't believe in reincarnation. So for Augustine, there's a spark or a piece of God in us, a piece of the eternal, holy God in us. And that piece of the holy, eternal God is what allows us to know right from wrong, and to know what goodness is, and to know what good is and what happiness is, and we're striving for it. And so this brings up the question of memory and how memory works. So Augustine writes a theoretical treatise on memory, but the purpose for this is not just to do theory or because he's a philosopher, it's because he wants to get back to God. So he starts chapter 10 by saying, cognoscam te cognitor meos, cognoscam, sicut et cognitus sum. So let me know you, I guess you could say. Let me know you, O you who know me. Let me know you, right? So he wants to know God. And the whole thing about memory is to get back to God, because it's all bound up with how we can get back there, right? It's not through the senses of the world. He turns inside. And what does he have inside? He has his memory. He has this memory of what's right and wrong. He believes it's not from a past life, but because we were given it. So he believes in original sin. He's famous for, and famously condemned for believing in original sin, but he also believes that deep inside of every man there's the belief in God, the belief in good. I won't talk too much about chapter 10. Let me just go through some of the basics. He compares memory to a great storehouse, a treasure, a great palace full of treasures. And he talks about how memory works. And I'm kind of forgetting what else I was going to tell you about that, so I'll just move on. So the point of do you have a soul is yes, you have memory, imagination, and will. It's called faculty psychology, Christian faculty psychology. And he covers, as I said, in chapters 10 11, 12, and 13 of the Confessions, and yeah, I'll leave it. All right. So I think I'll stop here. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to, well, before I stop, let me read this. I want you to talk about the pear incident. So Augustine talks about when he was a kid, he stole pears, and he did something wrong just for the enjoyment of doing something wrong. So you can ask yourself why. And you can ask yourself, is he judging himself too harshly? I'm going to give you a writing assignment on seva, but for now I'm going to end the lecture here. Let me just make sure I don't have any more important slides. Okay, so that's enough.